I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, welcome back to VLGA Connect, and it's time for the latest in our Local Leaders series. And we're going to get to know the Mayor of Hume City Council a little bit better today. Councillor Joseph Haweil is my guest. Joseph, great to see you.
Good to be with you as always, Chris.
And thank you for joining us on this program. There's a few topical issues I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on, as well as digging a little deeper into what makes you tick as a councillor and a mayor, as we tend to do on this program. This term of mayor for you, how's that been?
Well, it's my second term as mayor and second term on council. And really, in many ways, I often say it's a job that you really wouldn't give away if you didn't have to. It has such an immense amount of variety and opportunity in it. And particularly in a growth city like the one I'm in Hume, there are new things happening each and every day. And really, in some ways, I didn't come into this expecting to spend most of my time thinking about infrastructure, but in many ways, that's what it's become for us in this part of the world. So I think about this role each and every day, almost in the sense of building a new city, building the new frontier of Melbourne, which is much of what we're experiencing. It's a great job. And in many ways, it's much more than a job. I certainly see it as a vocation.
So as you say, it's your second time as mayor. How is it different this time around to your first term as mayor?
Well, the first time around, you're sort of, getting into the role, trying to learn the ropes as it is, and slowly build up the confidence that's required. In some ways, you come in a second term, not only as mayor, but a second term on council as well, almost knowing how the machinery of government works. And you're able then to better assess matters as they come before you and make decisions much more quickly. Also, I think as a second term as mayor and the second term on council, in some ways you see all of the strategic thinking that played out in your previous term as a group and as an individual almost coming to fruition. And that's something that reinforces in my mind that the system works. Sometimes much slower than we'd want it to, but it certainly does work. And I've certainly seen that this time around.
Take us back to, we will talk about some of the current issues and challenges that I know you're dealing with in a little bit, but take us back to before you became a councillor. What was the thing that drove you to put your hand up for local representation?
Well, I was always very actively involved in my community, in the multicultural sector in particular. And so for me, a lot of my work was actually that person on behalf of community members who needed support, knocking on doors and advocating and rabble-rousing and pushing and agitating and trying to get things done. And so for me, there came a realization at that point that, look, I'd like a seat at the table, perhaps so that I can make some of the decisions or be better informed or have a role in making some decisions, as opposed to being a voice on the outside, always agitating for something to happen. And so that's really what was the motivating factor for me. But I also have a lot of lofty ideals in my mind about public service. I think many people who are in public service in whatever sphere sort of start off that way, thinking that we can make a contribution just to make society, community, state, nation, world better. There's a lot of idealism there, and that certainly still exists with me every day. It's about how do we improve the lifetime well-being of people. But for me, in many ways, it was wanting to have a seat at that table to be able to raise things. On the other hand, I was also really annoyed about some things, and that was in our city, and it's a very granular thing, things like infringements and narrow streets and nature strips. And you have to have sometimes those driving grievances in some ways to help motivate you and push you over the line to say, yes, I believe in public service and helping others, but I'm also really annoyed about something and maybe I can have a go at fixing it. So that was very much the case for me at the time.
Do you consider yourself a politician?
I think in a council like ours, and the size of a council like ours and the system in the direction in which it's going, it is becoming more political. I remember when I was first elected, many of my colleagues who've been around for some time, 10, 15, 20 years, said, you have to remember, young Joseph, that this is not a political environment. You may be a party member, you may be involved in politics, but in many ways this is a board, and we don't get into the political side of things. Unfortunately, the reality is that I think politics and sometimes political thinking underlines a lot of what we do and shapes the direction we go in. I think that's unavoidable in every organization. I mean, the boards of companies have politics. The boards of not-for-profit organizations have politics. So I don't necessarily, go to work every day thinking I'm a politician in the sense that they do perhaps at the state or federal level, where very clearly they are. And that's simply because of the deep community impact and connection of this role. But there's no denying that politics in some ways covers many parts, if not each and every part of what we do each day.
You must have always had an interest, though. You studied politics, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I studied politics and history, and then at a postgraduate level, international relations at the University of Melbourne. So in many ways, from the uni campus onwards, I've always been deeply fascinated by politics and how the interplay of power, society, and community helps shape the way decisions are made. So certainly it was not new to me. I'd always been a very political person in the sense that I am interested in the world around me, and I'm interested in how decisions are made. And I'm not a person who consistently wants decisions made for me. I want to be able to inform them.
So do you have political ambitions beyond local government?
Well, anyone you ask in local government, Chris, will always say, I'm focused on the role at hand. Obviously, I'm very interested in this space, in public service. I wouldn't be in it if I wasn't. But at the same time, I don't think that all public service and politics necessarily needs to be done in an elected sense. There are people who have very long and meaningful careers in the public service, those who serve their country in other ways. But certainly any way that I think I can make a contribution, I'd want to do.
So you were talking a bit before about the unavoidable political nature sometimes, even at the local level. What do you say to those people that say councils are getting involved these days in things that is not their remit, not their core business? How do you respond to those, some would say, outdated in many ways, arguments?
Well, we have to constantly contend with this silly roads, rates and rubbish mantra that we hear all the time. And again, I keep saying, in a city like mine, we may have an act and a system that operates on the basis that local government, was 100 years ago, and you had a town of 2,000 people and a mayor and a part-time councillors to fix a few things. But when you're in a city like Hume, it's got almost a $500 million budget, $5 billion in assets, heading towards 400,000 people. You can't confine and constrain its functions and activities to 3 areas. It's providing more than 100 services itself, and indeed some councils provide more than 120 all around Victoria. So I don't go for that, 3 R's and method of thinking, though I should say that I think councils and councillors should be pragmatic about how far their influence reaches and be realistic about what they want to do. I think where there have been some councils, and let's just be honest about it, who've overstepped really the realm of their decision-making authority and influence, they've done so not because they're not sort of meaningful interventions, they're not idealistic, they genuinely and honestly believe in the issues and causes they're pursuing. But sometimes they've allowed, I think, those causes to take up too much of their time, if not most of their time. So it's okay to have a view about the world. It's okay to have a view on things outside of the general scope of what councils do. But if that becomes all you're associated with and all that you spend your time on, then you need to go back to basics, I think, and have a look at doing your core functions. And then having to think about the others as well.
You are on the board of the MAV, which is the peak body for the sector in Victoria. And I was surprised to read that when you were first elected to that board, you were the first Hume City Councillor to have that honour. That's a surprise in some respects, given the size of your municipality?
Yeah, that's right. There certainly have been very many active delegates in the past, and I don't know if any had contested a board
Mm.
election, but I certainly was the first Hume City Councillor to be elected to the board, and I'm very privileged to be on the board. I mean that not only um, in a sort of tokenistic way that people say something is a privilege or an honour, as if it's a cliche, but to say that being around the board table really gives you an insight into how other councils work. And particularly if you're, say, from Melbourne, inner city Melbourne, or even the outer suburbs, you sometimes are not exposed to the views that may exist in the rest of the state, or for that matter, through ALGA, throughout the rest of the nation. And you work out that, there's a lot we agree on, but certainly there are very many schools of thought about how things should be done in this sector. And for the MAV, I sort of feel for it as an organisation, and for those who've preceded me on the board, it is a tight balancing act very often.
So you're in a deputy president role there, and it's in that context that you've made some comments this week about the government's new housing statement and associated planning reforms. Let's just take a step back from that. Firstly, Operation Sandon came out a couple of months ago now with some interesting recommendations, I guess, for the sector, some of which we can see influenced in these latest state government announcements. How do you respond to the school of thought that potentially the sector or the government is overreacting to what's occurred at one council?
Well, I see Sandon in two parts. One is a whole set of recommendations around governance, and they're really yet to be dealt with. We don't know much about how that is going to play out. And I think that the MAV in particular will have an important role to play in dealing with that side of things. But on the other side of things, we've got the issue of housing and planning. I don't think that issues of corruption are widespread across the sector. I'll just say that very clearly. I just don't think it's the case. I've not seen evidence to that effect. There are always challenges in every sector, and Casey probably was the most egregious form of some of that corrupt behaviour that we've seen. On the other hand, it is fair to say that some of the sentiment out there from the government about the role of councils in perhaps holding up housing and linking councils and the sector to housing, I think has been overplayed a bit. We do know that councils, by and large, approve 90% of applications that come to us. But of course, we don't do that in a way that cuts out community voices. But in the package that we have seen announced this week, in a couple of days ago, and certainly in the position that we've put in terms of the MAV, it is that, more than words, we do actually want to be, and have consistently proven ourselves to be, a willing partner to government. I see a noted academic today writes in one of our major newspapers praising councils for actually having done the heavy lifting in addressing the housing crisis in this state for quite some time. So I think there has to be a balance in the direction we go in, and that is not this side of things that says councils are to blame for the housing crisis that we have. And the next step to that is taking away significant powers in order to rectify that. I don't think that's going to work. But on the other hand, it's not about saying, and I think it's been proven false by the evidence, that we can't work together with state government and have a multi-sector approach to doing things. I know a journalist who interviewed me this week probably was a bit frustrated that I didn't just come out and say, well, this is terrible, the government's wrong, we're going to slam this. There is a better way. We can actually work together, and we can make sacrifices in terms of the way we do things to get better outcomes. It's been done before and it can be done again. It doesn't have to pit one group, one sector, one player against the other. I don't go for that way of doing things. And I think it's going to have to mean that we make sacrifices ourselves. Facilitation of larger scale planning applications is not unheard of. It's being done already all around Australia. It's being done in Victoria through the Development Facilitation Program, through some fast track programs post COVID to generate economic activity. So it's not as if any of this is new. It is actually happening each and every day, but we want to make sure that the next incarnation of that doesn't cut out the community voice completely. And that's what I think our sector should be focusing on.
Yes. Some of the government's arguments, though, are a bit selective, aren't they? When you look at the data that's coming out of the local government sector and the arguments for why some of these changes should be made. I think we've seen some changes gazetted that the sector wasn't consulted on. So what would you say about the need for councils to actually be at the table as these changes are progressed?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I see that gazetting planning scheme changes without consulting councils at all is obviously less than ideal, in fact, unacceptable to us as a sector. I think that we are coming to the table with a very open and transparent and reasonable approach, if I can use that word, but I think that has to be reciprocated as well. The MAV came out with some very interesting data this week, indicating that 120,000 permits have been issued for townhouses and units by councils that have not even been acted upon by the sector. So there is that question there about how do we ensure that the sector is not delaying things only to deliver them when economic times are better for them and to maximize their profits. That has to be addressed as well.
Another issue you've spoken about in a couple of contexts is councillor behaviour generally, and I do want to ask you about your rather impassioned statement at a council meeting a few weeks back about the way LG Pro has responded to, I guess, the call for a review of the culture in the sector and to deal what many perceive as a problem with councillor behaviour. You had some pretty strong views on that.
I did, as did a majority of my council in making that decision to cease our corporate membership of LG Pro. Look, I don't think that is going to be a decision that will last very long, but certainly our council wanted almost to make its case to LG Pro about some of the sentiments that had come out there. Now, things are reported often in a way that is contrary or different or slightly different to the way things are said. But our concern was not necessarily just with an article in The Age, for instance, in which LG Pro was featured. There's more substance to it than that. It was about some of the suggestions being made by LG Pro, for which I don't think any councillors were consulted. Things like having powers to ban councillors for 3 years or issue monetary fines. I just think they're bad ideas, not just because they have been shaped with interesting and perhaps a bit of sensationalist language in the media. They're just bad ideas that don't respect the fact that in a society, in a democratic society, power and decision-making authority is derived from the will of the people. I believe that as a philosophy. And that means that when councillors, just like any other co-equal level of government in this country, are elected, they have the authority to make decisions, giving external parties, whether they be officers, bureaucrats, or other authorities at the state government level, those powers, which are not replicated at any other level of government or indeed any other council around the country, is something philosophically that I certainly have a problem with. So I have every respect for the work LG Pro does, but my council, given the motion was put to us, had to make a decision. And certainly in shaping the way I thought about it, it was certainly to say that some of the sentiments and suggestions put up by LG Pro were not ones I agreed with. Though I should say that I think in future years to come, and possibly even sooner than that, that sort of corporate membership will come back, depending on the satisfaction of council as to what approach the organisation is taking. The important thing is that we talk to each other more, rather than come up with policy positions without ever consulting each other, and that was a challenge in this as well.
So on that, and it's good to hear that you're open, obviously, to returning to the fold at some point in time, and you did clearly make your point. Have you had some follow-up discussions with the president or the CEO at LG Pro about that?
Yes, yeah. The president has very kindly and graciously written to us with a range of responses to our very lively council debate in that regard, and to the position of Hume City Council. And I'm hoping to meet with her at some point soon to go through some of those points. And just to reiterate that sometimes in the passion of debate in a chamber, people certainly say things, but it should never reflect on officers. And as a career public servant myself outside of the council world, I have every respect for people who work in that sector as officers. They do an incredible amount of work and great quality work as well. And I expect that following that meeting, we'll be able to get a better understanding of each other's approach to things.
So on the subject of standards of behaviour, do you accept there is an issue and that something needs to be done? And if so, what?
There is an issue with behaviour, but not only in this sector. I would not over-egg the challenges that we have in this sector. There are 79 councils. There have been challenges in a few. The nature of any, let's say, political entity is that people have different views and clash with each other. Don't the boards of Qantas and BHP and Rio Tinto and every other major company and organisation clash with each other in terms of their strategy and approach and perspective? The issue is when that steps over the line and becomes a conduct issue. I think what's been very unhelpful for the sector has been the conduct framework. And that's something that I've said now to a number of ministers who've been in that role while I've been on council, particularly in my previous capacity as a member of the advisory group to the local government minister, the mayoral advisory panel, where we have for some time been saying that there are issues with the framework. It is slow. It sometimes has the reverse effect of encouraging people to put in complaints that may not otherwise be of great substance. So we do need to look at that framework in a way that it consults everyone, councillors themselves in particular, through local government Victoria, and find a better way forward. The issues around personality clashes and behaviour and complaints, we just know in a society that's never going to go away. There will be that in every single organisation. The question is, does the framework help us manage it and manage it well and help then to reduce those instances, or does it exacerbate some of those challenges? And at this point, I think the pendulum has probably swung in the wrong direction too far, and we need to rectify that.
Let's be a bit more Hume focused just for the last couple of minutes that we have. Not much left on this current mayoral term, a little over 12 months in the current council term. What are you hoping to see achieved before we move into that electoral cycle again and everything becomes inherently political?
I certainly, and this is a selfish one to begin with, I certainly want to see a lot of the projects that we have committed to on this term of council, and even some at the end of the last term, come to fruition and be delivered. Only today I'm off to open a brand new community centre up there in Melbourne's north. Next week I'll open another one. Very few mayors and councillors get to do that. In this part of the world, we open big new buildings that are built for 5, 10, 20, $50 million just about every other week. So I'm happy to see those projects come to fruition, because I know they improve the lives of people who live in our community. At a more strategic level, as we go into election year, what I have been quite interested in, and in some ways concerned about, is leaving a proper handover to those who come next. We can always, as a councillor group, reflect on the fact that we came in a certain way and were provided some support, or perhaps not provided enough support. I think those critical early months, 6 months to 1 year, are very, very important to the future cohesion and good operation of a council. So I'm very interested in two things. One is making sure that we help support members of the community who are putting their hand up to understand what is the scope of the role, what it's about, what is our jurisdictional responsibilities, not to go out there committing to, end the nuclear submarine deal, or, deliver grammar schools in certain suburbs, things that are just clearly beyond the scope of what we do. Of course, people can advocate, but to deliver certain things is difficult. So making sure that we have an informed populace and an informed, let's say, candidate group. And then I think a legacy for our council, and indeed others, will be to say that the next council is really, really well inducted so that they can perform well. And to that extent, I'm very pleased to say, Chris, that the Northern Councils Alliance, another group that I'm involved in and proud to be the chair of, is working collectively to say, can we pool some of our induction resources so that each one of us doesn't do things differently? Each one of us doesn't have to expend a whole bunch of time, effort and money and resources to deliver the same thing. And what can we do to better induct the next group of people who come in at the end of 2024? So certainly that's what I've been focusing on and thinking about where it comes to next year.
That's really heartening to hear, that level of thinking and effort that's going into preparing, as you say, those who come next. How optimistic are you about the pool of candidates that are emerging from the community to be future leaders?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I think that there's a real awakening, especially amongst young people, about the fact that their world is changing and the circumstances in which they're living really need strong and, in some cases, dare I say, radical interventions to ensure that their future and standard of living is not only commensurate with those of the people who came before them, but better in some ways. And I see very many young people in my own community here in Hume who are interested to that extent. Also about ensuring that there's a more diverse representation in local government. I tell you, Chris, when I was elected in 2016 and first went to an MAV, state council, and looked around, there were not very many people who looked like me, I must say, and that's changed over time. But also, I know that the Victorian government in particular is investing strongly in training programs for women and minority groups. And I know a couple of very impressive people who are part of those programs. And, I say to them all the time, I hope you run and I hope you win, because I think you do a very good job in this city. I think any good leader tries the best as possible not to hoard positions for themselves. It's about identifying people who they think are capable people and who could do well, and actually going out there encouraging them to come and contribute. That leads to circumstances where we get really high functioning people who understand the issues, who are willing to resolve any disputes or differences of opinion and focus on the greater good. And it all starts with having very good and capable people. So I certainly am optimistic and hopeful for the best next year.
I think that's very commendable. Everyone gets asked this question, Joseph. What do you do away from council to have some balance and perspective in your life?
Well, family is the most important. I'm so blessed. I've got two young daughters, a 2-year-old, just over 2, and now almost a 4-month-old. And I grew up in an environment where family is critical to everything. So they always give me perspective and almost each day insights into why I try and make a contribution, even if it's just in a small way, to the community in which I live. It's to benefit them and to create a better future for them. That's critical to the way I think about things.
If you weren't an elected member in local government, what do you think you'd be doing?
I'd like to be on a beach in the Mediterranean or in the Greek islands or something.
That's nice, but I meant professionally.
I know. That's what I'd like to be doing professionally. It would certainly be something in government or politics or public service. And when I say public service in particular, I mean public policy. That's the space I'm interested in and always have been. How do we contribute to the policies that build better communities and a better future for people? And whether or not in the future I'm on this council or indeed on any council or in this role, I would certainly be trying to find a role that helps me deliver some of those lofty aspirations that are in my mind.
Joseph, I think we'll leave it there. You've been very generous with your time and your insights, and I've really enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks for joining us on Local Leaders.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure as always.
That's Councillor Joseph Haweil, the Mayor of Hume City Council, on Local Leaders from VLGA Connect.